Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I see some familiar faces, some new faces, some that should probably be familiar to me. But we're thankful that you're all here. Generally speaking, at the annual review, and certainly thankful that you've joined us for our session today. A lot of great sessions to choose from right now. In fact, I have some really wonderful friends and colleagues speaking other things I'd love to be listening to, but I think you're in the right place. I happen to think. My name is Paul Lambert. I'm the Religion and Human Flourishing Initiative Director at the Wheatley Institute. For those of you that may not be familiar with the Wheatley Institute, we have three areas of focus: religion and society, constitutional government, and marriage and family. And within religion, we look at the role that religion plays in human flourishing. The presentation today about religion and health was right up my alley. That's stuff that we look a lot at. We look a lot of data along those lines, uh, not just in health and mental health, but its role in democracy, its role in education, its role in economics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I'm really excited to be moderating, really more introducing maybe this presentation or this session. Um, I got it. Thank you. Um, so as you know, part of this annual review, particularly in the past few years, is to help us understand not just the law around religious freedom, but the why behind religious freedom. Why is it that we need religious freedom? Why is it that lived religion is so important to a flourishing society? And then digging into aspects of that are pertinent to today's world. One of the aspects that is obviously no surprise to any of us that we face today is a challenge of division within the United States. Not just the United States, but we'll talk about the United States today. Um, whether we call that toxic polarization or social division or just plain old hate and malice towards one another, I think we've all seen and probably experienced this challenge, and we see it tearing things apart, and not in a positive disruptive way, but in a really destructive way. And that's why I'm so excited about our session today. Uh, we're grateful to have Chandra and Nanette here from the One America movement. And part of the reason we wanted to bring One America here is because we think this is such a unique and important approach to countering this social division, this political division, this malice and difficulty that we're facing in society. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to introduce my friends, and they are my friends. We're not meeting for the first time today. I'm not going to take a lot of time to introduce them. You can look them up on the website. Chandra is the COO of One America Movement. She's currently serving as the CEO. She pointed out to me that this is a mistake on the program. It says CEO. It's not a mistake, and let me tell you why. She's been serving as interim CEO for 3 months, um, while also doing her other duties as COO. Chandra is going to be going on vacation in a few weeks as she turns the reins back to Andy Hanauer, who's the CEO. But he's been on sabbatical. So Chandra, CEO, and COO, we're thrilled to have you here. And Nanette, as you can see, is VP of Programs at One America, and we're just so grateful that they've traveled here. They're not from this area; they've traveled here to be with us. So let me just set this up, and then I'm going to kind of turn it over to them to give you an introduction and the frameworks of One America. So um, I think we're all familiar with a number of organizations that are trying to counter this social division, this political division, this malice, this hate that we see in society today. And thank goodness for all of them. I think they're all doing, or many of them are doing great work. They're earnest in their efforts to bring us together as Americans to help us see past our differences. But One America has a very particular angle, a very specific angle, and that is that they look to the role of religion and the impact of religion and the things that come from religious practice and religious faith to solve this problem. And that is unique. Other organizations include religion in their approach to countering this division. But One America leans into it. It's part of their framework. It's part of their hypothesis, their thesis, if you will. And I think that's really unique. Now, speaking for me, and certainly I think I speak from my not only personal view, but my professional view at BYU, we believe that religion is the key, that it is the structure, it is the thing that can actually get us through this. I think we've seen that political structures can only take us so far. Again, I'm speaking for myself here, but we know that political structures also aren't transcendent. They're not divine. They're not eternally true. They don't have eternal significance. They're man-made structures that we use for good reason. But we need something deeper if we are going to really heal and find the strength and understanding to heal the divisions that we're currently facing. And I think that's what's so unique and special about the One America movement. So really grateful to give some light to this movement today. And I hope this is not only interesting and instructive, but I hope it's motivating, and I hope it causes all of us to want to get involved and dig in a little deeper with our personal commitments, whatever our faith tradition is, whatever our belief system is. So with that, Chandra, why don't I turn to you first and lead us through this?
I packed pretty light on this trip, which means I did not bring a clicker. So I'm going to stand over here. Normally I'd like to kind of walk around a little bit, but I'll just be on this side. I'd like to start, first of all, by thanking you, Paul, for inviting us to participate in this event and to bring this breakout session. And of course, thank you to all of you for choosing this particular room to join. I feel very blessed to be among all of you. I want to begin today with a story, actually, of a friend of mine named Pastor Brian. Pastor Brian leads an evangelical non-denominational church in Southern California, just outside of LA. And back in 2023, when the unfortunate attack happened on Israel by Hamas, Pastor Brian turned to his scriptures. And he found the place in Romans where the Apostle Paul says that we are to mourn with those who mourn. And he felt convicted by this scripture, and he called a rabbi that he knew in the community. And they weren't great friends. They didn't work across divides regularly, but he called this fellow up and he just asked him, "How are you doing? What do you need from our community? How can we help you?" And he mourned with that rabbi. And then as the war went on, he realized that actually there was another group that was in mourning in his community, and that's the Muslim community. And he also sadly realized that he did not have those connections. And so we had a conversation with Pastor Brian, and we invited a local Muslim leader into conversation with Brian. And he spent some time with this other fellow, and he mourned with that leader as well, as he shared about how dozens of his family members had been killed in Gaza. And then he went back to his own congregation and he said, "You know what? We need to be talking about this. Why don't you all come to my house and we'll have dinner and we'll talk about the war that is going on in the Middle East." And there are varying theologies around Israel in his own congregation. And so they explored all of those things. And then they invited that rabbi and that Muslim leader to come to their church and to worship together and to break bread together. And so this is all because Pastor Brian turned to the core tenet of his faith that says we should mourn with those who mourn. And so it's that kind of action that draws us out and can be that practical peacemaking that we're talking about today. At the One America movement, we believe that toxic polarization is a spiritual crisis. If we are being told by our society that the people who are across our divides are evil, that they're hateful, that they have to be stopped at all costs, well, that actually is harming us from the inside out. We cannot be the people that we are called to be by our various faith traditions when we get sucked into this kind of toxic polarization. Now, the good news is that our faith traditions have been teaching us how to live in community for thousands of years. We are not alone in this. This isn't new. We just need to turn to the faith traditions that we hold dear. So for us, faith is a powerful response to the crisis of toxic polarization. So just a little stage setting here. We at the One America movement are not trying to say we have to agree on every single thing, because we're not going to agree on every single thing. In fact, disagreement is the bedrock of our democracy. We have to disagree. We have to intellectually tussle things out so that we can come to the best policy solutions for all of us. And actually, disagreement and polarization is a healthy part of our pluralistic society. What makes our polarization toxic is whenever it stops being about our ideas, what we think should happen in society, and instead becomes about our identities. We think we know every single thing about a person just by who they voted for, or maybe the sticker that they have on their car, or the slogan they wear on their hat. This kind of polarization has us turning away from our neighbors. And when we turn away, we're liable to make more assumptions, negative assumptions about them. And so, of course, we're not going to come together and learn the truth about each other because we are so polarized, and so it becomes this vicious cycle that just gets worse and worse. So it comes down to the question of, how do we view the other? Do we view the other as people who are evil or hateful? Or do we view them as our neighbor, as a friend we haven't met yet, as someone we can be curious about? In a time of toxic polarization, we often view the other in three very harmful ways. One is as the extreme other. So we work with neuroscientists and social scientists to understand how toxic polarization plays out in our society. And there's a lot of research out there that suggests that we are really bad at guessing what people across our divides think about different issues. We think that people across our divides hold very extreme views, and actually that's just not the case. And Nanette will show us some more research on that in a little bit. We also tend to think that people across our divides are hateful. This is called negative meta-perceptions. We think that people across our divides hate us, and so then what do? We hate them back, right? So that is actually not true. People across our divides do not hold these hateful views of us as much as we think that they do. And finally, and perhaps the most frighteningly, in toxic polarization, we have a view of the other that is dehumanized. We tend to hear dehumanizing language that equates other people with animals or with things that we might consider to be disgusting. And this kind of language, as we have seen in other contexts, can lead to really harmful outcomes, including genocide. So we have to be very concerned about how we think of the other. So as we're thinking about toxic polarization, I'd like to give you an opportunity to engage as well with this question. What is one aspect of your faith? Maybe it is a scripture, a tenet, a value, a tradition, that if we could apply that, that would help heal our country's divides. If you've never used Slido, just take your phone camera, point it up at the QR code there, tap on the screen, don't accidentally take a picture of it, which is what I do all the time. Tap on the screen, it will take you to a website where you can answer this question. And we already see one answer flowing in. Love everyone. I'll just scroll through as they're coming in. Acknowledge differences. Perfection is achieved as a group, not on an individual basis. I am so interested in that one. I want to know where that one comes from. Service, be a good neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself. Serve, we are all created from a single soul. Empathy, as I have loved you, love one another, and love everyone. So each of us has tenets and values that are embedded into our faith tradition that if we drew on those, then we could heal our country's divides. We don't have to agree. We don't have to have the same theology. There are very different theologies listed, illuminated even in this list. But if we can draw on those pieces, then we'll be able to come together across our divides, even in the midst of our disagreement. So at its best, our faith communities can help us to do two things. Number one is address our group dynamics internal to our own group. How do we view people who are other than us? Are we able to stand up when people in our own group are starting to tend toward the extreme? In other words, our faith communities can provide a space of belonging and healthy norms and values. And on the other hand, our faith communities can be a way for us to break down barriers between our groups. So when we engage in cross divides work, maybe it's cross the religious divide, bringing Jewish people and Christian people and Muslim people together to do service, to work on the issues that they care about in their community, then we can actually break down the barriers between our groups. So at the One America movement, we have programs that support faith leaders to build a network of people of faith who speak and act against toxic polarization in accordance with their own faith tradition. I'll give you a brief overview of kind of the programs that we run, and then I'm happy to answer questions about those programs at the end. The first thing, which is relative to the building faith communities as a place of belonging with healthy norms and values, we engage faith networks. So we build networks of faith leaders within their own faith tradition where they can talk about the social science behind polarization and then apply their own faith traditions to that. So on the screen, I have a picture of three of these efforts. In the upper corner, that is a group of rabbinic students at Hebrew Union College who were doing a 4-day intensive with our director of Jewish programs, talking all about how polarization works in society and how do they play a role in leading their own communities on this effort. In the far image there, we see a picture of our Matthew 5-9 Fellowship and their ambassador program. This is a program that brings together evangelical Christian leaders and pastors to help their communities to put their identity in Christ above their political identity. So that's a group of pastors there in that picture. And then on your right here is a group of Muslim chaplains, actually, who are engaging with our senior Muslim advisor about how their faith can play a role in this as well. So that's just a few examples of how we're building faith networks among like-minded leaders. And then at the same time, we're asking those leaders to bring their congregations together across divides to work on issues they care about in their communities. So we currently have 6 hubs across the country where these faith leaders are bringing their congregations together. The upper corner there on the left is a group in Chicago that is building relationships across the Black church and the Jewish divide. In the bottom left corner, you see a picture of a group that we did a few years ago in Houston, where they came together across their divides to rebuild after Hurricane Harvey, and then they traveled together to Puerto Rico to rebuild after Hurricane Maria. So they're doing a real construction project there. In the middle picture, that's the very first One America event ever, which was a park cleanup. And on this corner here, we have an image of a festival that was put on by faith leaders in their communities for youth in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's just a little variety of the kinds of projects that people do whenever they're coming together across their divides. The idea being that when we work together, even if we never talk about our differences, then we are forming an identity together that says, you may believe this and I may believe that, but we both care about youth in our community. We both care about this park. We both care about rebuilding, and that can strengthen our relationships across our divides. So now I will turn it over to Nanette to do a little bit of the social science with you all.
Good morning again. It's great to be here with you all. One of the things that we do so well at One America is really getting participant involvement in our workshops. And as you see, we did the piece on Slido, so we're going to continue in that same vein. We're going to talk about the perception gap. We often hear that we are polarized, and we often hear how much we are divided. But I want to challenge you with a question. Is this divide as wide as we think? Or is that we are simply misunderstanding each other? So our partners at Beyond Conflict in 2020 did a study on different polarizing topics. And one of them was immigration. And they surveyed Republicans, where they surveyed Republicans and Democrats, where 0 is completely open borders, and 100% is completely closed borders too as well. And you see that there is a hollow middle, suggesting that there's a strong division between the two parties, and that both fall on the extreme side of things. But what happens with this is the perception of how Republicans perceive Democrats and vice versa. But we realize that this is actually not true at all. And we realize that the reality of how groups think and how they perceive others is a huge difference. And in actuality, there's a huge position overlap when we actually looked at the positions Democrats have and the positions that Republicans have too as well. And so this really points out that there's a difference between how groups think and how they are perceived by others. And this is the difference that we want to explore today. So we're going to go back to Slido again and invite you all to participate in guessing what percentage of Republicans agree with this statement. So if you could please use your phones to take a shot of the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and put in that number. Yeah, 50%, 60, 20. $85. Take a few more. '87. Okay, one more. Okay. So, what was the response? It was actually 83% of Republicans agree with this statement. It is important every American student gets to learn about slavery and Jim Crow. And so now we're going to see, how do you think Democrats perceived this figure? So we're going to go back to Slido. So what was the Democrats' estimate of Republicans' agreement with this statement? 60, 42, 5, 15, 96. Okay, take a few more. Well, Democrats actually only estimated 32% of Republicans agreed with this statement. And this is a 51-point perception gap. This is what we call the perception gap that exists in society. What we think of others or what we think others think of us. And this, again, just goes to show that we are way off in assuming what others perceive. But also, it shows that we are not so far apart on issues. And oftentimes, we perceive that we are so far apart that why even bother having conversations? But in actuality, we are not as far apart as we think. And this is a really great example of how we view the other side and how our views of the other side can be distorted by our lived experiences, by what we've learned, by our community, what we see on the news, what we read. But we realize that in actuality, on this particular issue, Republicans, at least the majority, do support teaching about slavery and segregation, but Democrats think that this number is much, much lower. And this gap is part of the problem when we think about toxic polarization. So one thing that we love to do is in our workshops is for you all to have conversations with each other. So we have a couple discussion questions. There are quite a number of them. And so we ask you all to turn to your neighbor and have a discussion. Pick a couple of these questions and ask each other and have a discussion about these. The first one is, the data suggests that we have a lot more in common with the other than we think we do. How do you feel seeing this kind of information? In what ways might we unintentionally contribute to viewing the other differently than they really are? Does this research make you think of some of your own assumptions? And if so, how? If not, why? What factors might influence misperceptions we have about the other side? Knowing what you know now, and now about misperceptions, how might your faith or your core values guide your response in this very moment? So we're gonna take 10 minutes. If you could turn to the person sitting next to you, or you can form little clusters and have a conversation for about 10 minutes. Sorry to interrupt the engaging conversations, but want to do a quick debrief. So I invite a few, take about three to share what insights came out of the conversations that you had.
I'll share. I really liked what you talked about as a group. So I'm interning with Desert and Utah now, and my experience so far has been really interesting.
we've seen journalism kind of shift from, oh, thank you, from being, something that is not as accessible to something that is super accessible with the digital age. And so we've seen kind of new approaches to how we get the public more involved. And one of the ways that we do that is with comments in our articles. So people can write comments, and more often than not, the comments are way more polarizing than constructive. But we do have instances where people are disagreeing. I really like what we said in the beginning of the panel, where we talked about you can disagree without being disagreeable. And so we have instances where people really do take the time to read comments and reflect and respond in a way that is constructive. But like, I just wrote an article that was like a 2-minute write-up of this person that was talking about how he doesn't think that leaders are going to emerge from politics, because we all it's just too polarized, and we all want the same thing, so that should be our focus. We all want to be safe, we all want to be respected. And so the comments were really interesting, because people were talking about, okay, well, what does that even mean? Like, we all want to be respected. We all want to be safe. I want to be able to carry a gun around because that's what makes me feel safe. And other people, for them, being safe is, enforcing gun laws. So it's just interesting, like, reading the comments. And so I think it's really important to approach things, I don't know, I guess from a place of understanding. And I like what we're talking about here, that we, more often than not, just assume, And so I think if there's like one takeaway from this, if I don't know, if I could say something to the people commenting in our comment section, it would be like, to don't assume, but yeah, to take the time to listen. Yeah.
In our group, we talked about the polarization is often caused because people read very different history books and thus form their opinions on the basis of very different facts. And it's important to recognize that that has taken place, that people are reading very different points of view, some of which are based on facts, some of which are based on myths. And so the challenge as you try to be a peacemaker is to understand that person's interpretation of history. But also, so much of the polarization comes from a difference in perspective on today's news. And that if you have two people involved in a toxic, polarizing conversation, one is probably watching Fox and the other one's probably watching MSNBC. And the guy who's watching Fox is reading the New York Post or the Washington Examiner, and the guy who's watching MSNBC is reading the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so if that's all that's going into your brain, whether it's from the study of history or the study of or keeping up with media accounts of, quote, the news, of course there's going to be toxic polarization. And part of the effort to be an effective peacemaker is to get that on the table, so at least you have a better understanding of where somebody's coming from and the basis for which he or she is forming his opinions. And that's important if you're going to be more empathetic and understanding, that of course that person thinks that way because of what he's been or she's been reading.
I want to share a quick anecdote about that exact thing. So after October 7th happened, we had a board meeting scheduled in November of 2023, and we have Jewish, Muslim, Christian, all different folks on our board. And we knew it was going to be a challenge because we as an organization need to be having the same kinds of difficult conversations that we ask other people to be having. And so we ended up spending 2 days at this board meeting having a really intensive conversation about the war. And to your point, even among the people who are on our board, what we identified was that we were all seeing very different news and very different comments in our social media feeds. And it was only because they already had the relationships and the trust built before that terrible event happened that they could even have that conversation. As one of our board members said recently, he said, we had earned the trust. And so in that moment, we could spend the trust. And so we have to be able to get proximate with people who are different than ourselves, because we're not going to get there just by looking at news or social media.
I really just have a question to your point. And my question is, the polls that we saw showed overlap that people didn't perceive because of the pundits and other 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, won't those polls be different? Right now, there's overlap. But if this continues, I'm concerned that this is a moment in time that's not going to exist 30 years from now if we don't start bridging those gaps. And to do that, you have to deal with the source of a lot of what's dividing people, reading different history books, listening to different pundits.
So I'm I'm not an official One America movement employee, but I am on One America's board. So I do proudly speak for One America in some things. Let me share an insight I've had, and part of the reason I'm supportive of One America. I think Chandra showed a picture of the Matthew 5:9 movement, which, as a reminder, this is the group of kind of like, think of it as like a subgroup of One America that focuses on evangelical pastors. And the invitation there, in summation, as Chandra put it, was to invite them to see themselves first in their religious identity, and in their case as Christians, before they see themselves as their political identity. And I would probably say, why don't we get like 10 identities before we get to the political identity? But I think to that, I think there's so much strength here in this approach. If we see ourselves first as in my case, a Christian, and if I can try and live by those principles, I'm much more likely to unbind myself from the political structures. For example, this idea that we're on a political spectrum and that everyone's either on the left or on the right or red or blue. And I'll just shout out, there's a scholar here, Verlin Lewis, sitting right behind you, who's an expert on this, right? This whole idea that this whole spectrum thing is actually a big myth, which it is. So I think if we can lean into these kind of identities that give us the ability to engage with one another, it actually prepares us to unbind ourselves, to free ourselves of these kinds of trends that will get us to a place where we're just getting worse and worse and worse and more and more and more divided. Again, that's I think the strength of the One America movement, is saying lean into something that has meaning and shed the stuff that doesn't. And the fact that you're red or blue, that turns out that's a big bowl of hogwash, right? So let's lean into something that's much more substantive and can get us to talk to one another in meaningful ways. Oh, we've got the 5 minutes. Why don't we, what other questions? Let's just do Q&A here for the remainder of our 5 minutes.
So even before I attended this session, sort of anticipating what we talk about and then doing this session, I still have a big problem. And that is, while religion motivates so many of us, so many people to do good, religion also motivates many people to do very bad things. We have extremists who are very religious, and their religious extremism drives them to do very horrible things. The question is, how do we bridge the gap then between the extremists who allow their religion to drive them to do very bad things and the religious people, extremists on the other side, who drive them to be pacifists and do so much good?
I think that's a great question. I mean, one thing that we really focus on is we're not just telling people, oh, make your religious identity your number one identity without any kind of connection to the problem at hand. That could mean a lot of different things, right? If you say, oh, my religious identity is number one, therefore I'm going to go do this really bad thing, if that's how you're viewing your own religion, which is why we have religious scholars and religious leaders on staff and on our board as well, to make sure that we're guiding people with the social science and the religion together. And then I think to answer your other question, kind of about how do you bridge from one more extreme end to the other more extreme end, I think is little increments at a time. We're not trying to say you should go out and have a conversation with someone who is an extremist. What we're saying is you should have a conversation in good faith with your neighbor. And then your neighbor can turn and have a conversation in good faith with their neighbor and their neighbor and their neighbor and their neighbor, all the way until we're reaching more and more people.
Just to add to that, another thing that we also do is building people's capacities to be able to speak within their own faith traditions. So how do you speak up when you realize that within your own faith tradition, people are getting to the extreme? That's really important. That's a core part of the work that we do, that we have programming specifically for that. How do you build your capacity to speak up? And how do you identify allies within your community to provide that support? Because you're going to need that support. It's very difficult because we all want to have a sense of belonging. And so speaking up may alienate you. So how do you do that? Is something that we work on. So we are not just looking at just cross divides, but we are also looking at the divides within the faith tradition too as well.
Maybe one more question.
This is not really a question, except to say, how do we find the resources that you've created?
Thanks for the transition.
Yeah, so if you'd like to get more involved, you can check out our website, oneamericamovement.org, or you can email Nanette or myself. Our email addresses are really challenging. It's our first name at oneamericamovement.org.
And maybe I'll just say as a testimonial, I think so my faith tradition, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the things that's inspiring to me is how much this aligns with what I see as my call to be a peacemaker. Elder Nash spoke very articulately about that a few minutes ago, and I see this as a practical example of how we do that, of how we can strive to be peacemakers according to our teachings, according to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and according to prophetic teachings. And so I hope the invitation is to all of us, whether we're Latter-day Saints or anything else, to be involved and try and follow these frameworks. And hopefully you'll reach out to Chandra and Nanette to see how you can be involved and put some punch in your peacemaking. Chandra and Nanette, any final words before we close things up?
Thank you. We are learning, we're growing, and we'd love for you all to be a part of it. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.